Okay, so just in case there are people who don't really understand what I was getting at there with the whole moral anti-realism thing, okay? So to explain like what the point is really quick. Okay. So basically, like I think that some things are good and some things are bad. What I think is good and bad like can depend on a lot of really complicated factors, you know? When we talk about whether or not things are good or bad, we're usually talking about something called normative ethics, which is like that's what we talk about when we talk about ethics, you know what I mean? Like, well, is it good to feed the homeless, you know? So you could say, I believe it is good to feed the homeless. And then, you know, somebody might ask why, okay? Why is it good to feed the homeless? And then you could say, well, I don't think that people should starve just because they're poor. And then you could ask like, okay, so why? And then you could say, well, I don't think that humans should suffer unfairly. And then somebody could ask, okay, why? And then you could say, well, I think human well-being is good. And then somebody could ask you, okay, why? Now, the problem here is that we've kind of retreated all the way back to the farthest point that normative ethics can take you. There's not really an answer to that. Like, why do you believe human suffering is good? Or sorry, human suffering is good. Why do you think human well-being is good? Why is human suffering bad? You know, you've kind of been backed up to the furthest point from a normative ethical position. So when I talk about moral anti-realism, you know, and we talk about axioms or properly basic beliefs or first principles, we now get to a first principle. And at this point, you would go, you know, somebody asks you, why do you think human well-being is good? And your answer can be, because that is a axiomatic belief that I have. That's a principle belief that I hold, a properly basic belief, a first principle. Like, and what we're talking about right there is a non-normative ethical position because it's not justified. That's why I say that axioms are arbitrary. They can't be defended. You can explain why you hold axioms, but at the end of the day, those defenses of your axiom are going to be about the consequences of your normative beliefs. It's downstream. There's nothing higher up than the axiomatic value, unless you wanted to get into meta ethics, which I fucking don't. So the idea is that once you've asked enough whys, you get backed up all the way to the axiom. And, you know, I don't think anyone really has like a concrete set of specific axioms they hold. It's more like a general vague idea of the things that they value. Because they're first principles, they're kind of necessarily blurry. And I think that's fine. For the most part, humans tend to have aligned ethics when it comes to their axiomatic beliefs. I think that we have strong biological impulses towards stuff like believing human well-being is good, you know? Fundamentally, I think that our brains are wired to like be biased in favor of that. Um, Not everyone, you know. In fact, so strong a bias we have that people who can't experience empathy, we literally have medical terms to describe their brains. Like, this person is antisocial. This person is a psychopath. You know, that kind of stuff. Um, that's because the biases we have towards humanistic axioms are so strong that when people don't have them, we kind of consider it like a problem, you know? Which in a way it kind of is, though it's possible to be antisocial and still behave ethically for reasons that guy laid out, sort of aligned self-interest. So the point that I'm getting at here is that axioms, since I believe them to be arbitrary, I don't believe there's any such thing as objective morality. If a person had an axiom where they were just like, yeah, white people are great, fuck Jewish people, yeah, and that was an axiom that they held, like not a normative ethical position, but an axiom, you know? Yeah, humanistic probably wouldn't be the best term there, Demon Mama. Socially aligned, yeah. If a person had those axioms, I don't think that's empirically, morally, objectively wrong in the sense that there's something universally wrong with it. I think that they're intersubjectively wrong, as in they deviate from the axioms that I prioritize and the ones we tend to like sort of socially gel with the most, which I think align more with your sort of humanist values, you know, and equality and egalitarianism and stuff like that. So the basic argument that I'm getting at here is that it's really, 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 really difficult to have a debate with somebody whose axioms are different from yours. This is one of the reasons that I have a bugbear when it comes to religion, you know? Because if a person has a set of fundamental values that are different from yours, because you're no longer in the realm of normative ethics, you can no longer refer to normative positions as a way of debunking their axioms. So if a person has an axiomatic value for human suffering, for example, let's say they're like opposite human, and they have an axiomatic belief that human suffering should be maximized rather than human well-being, right? If you were to talk with them while they're in the middle of, I don't know, stabbing a pregnant woman to death or something, you could be like, dude, cut that out. Can't you see that's bad? And they could look at you and be like, well, actually, I think it's good. And you can be like, but you're hurting that woman. And they can be like, yeah. You can be like, well, causing harm is bad. And they could be like, no. Like, how could you argue with them? You know what I mean? You can't really. You can't. There's not a. You can't make a logical argument. That's why you have a rock. Yes, exactly. Yeah, people make like the orc argument, and by people I mean me. The idea is like, if you have like 40k orcs in Warhammer 40k are basically just like mold creatures, and the only thing they care about is fighting, and that's it. Suffering, they don't care. Whether they're suffering or the other person, they don't care. They just want to fight. That's it. That's it. Biologically, that's it, you know? Imagine we were a starfaring civilization and we encountered orcs, that kind of orcs. They don't care if they die. They don't care if we die. They don't care about their civilization. They don't care about ours. They just want to fight. That's it. They don't care if they're fighting warriors. They don't care if they're slaughtering children. They don't care. They just want to fight. That is it, you know? How could you tell them, how could you argue that their morals are wrong? The answer is you can't, right? Like, you recognize this, correct? You can't. It's literally not possible. You can make normative arguments, but all of them are downstream your axioms. They have different axioms, therefore your normative arguments are not relevant to them. They are like within the purview of their axioms, they're objectively correct. As objectively correct as you are to believe that them slaughtering people for no reason is morally wrong from yours. That's why when I call people orcs in a political sense, what I mean, like Republicans or whatever, I mean like their morals are so out of whack with ours that it's like you can't like you can't even do anything, you know? So that's the point that I'm trying to make. And I don't think that humans or orcs would be the objectively right or wrong ones in that case. I just think that you would just have to have the bigger orc. You know what I mean? Or sorry, the bigger rock. They would have the bigger orc because they're the orcs. Orcs get quite big. You would have to have a bigger rock than they are orc. There you go. You need to have a big rock. Okay? You guys get me? You understand? Like you could never make peace with the orcs. It's not really possible. Like you just have to politically disempower them. You could demonstrate they believe in an axiom they're not admitting they hold. Yes. So to finish the point, the point that I'm trying to make is you can't argue a person out of their axiom because their axiom is objectively wrong, because there are no objectively wrong axioms. What you can do instead is try to point out contradictions between their axioms and their actual behavior. See, I think there's a reason why humans naturally gravitate towards the kind of socially aligned axioms that we hold. I think that we biologically benefit from it. Like I said while talking to the philosophy guy, right? I don't think that human suffering or human well-being are each more or less objectively right or wrong, but I do think humans tend to like well-being over suffering. I think you can make an experiential case to challenge axioms as a difficult process, but when I was religious, this is something that happened that led to my deconversion. Many conversions in which the value of my axiom was challenged. A key moment was having a close beloved friend come out as gay. Yeah. No, this is what I mean. So, like, for example, a person can have the pure axiomatic belief that being gay is morally wrong, like in its purest form, in which case nothing can happen, theoretically, that should be able to challenge that belief. But in reality, usually people who are homophobic don't have that pure axiomatic belief. Instead, they believe broadly in human freedom and well-being, and they think that being gay somehow is aberrant or predatory, like there's something wrong. A pure homophobe wouldn't have to make the argument that gay people are predators or dangerous to children or anything, because they could justify their homophobia from a purely axiomatic position. But instead, oftentimes bigotry takes the form of a kind of adjacency. I do think there are pure racists out there. There are people who believe, like on a fundamental level, the betterment of their race over others, and nothing could logically convince them out of that. And I do think those people exist, but I think they're the minority, which is why a lot of racists, understanding this, will make arguments like, oh, 1350, whatever. A pure racist wouldn't need black people to commit more crime to be racist. A pure racist could justify it axiomatically. There are such people, but I do think they're the minority. And often you can win people over by sort of tearing apart the normative positions they hold, which are or the empirical beliefs they have, which sort of prop up an inconsistency in their belief system. And that's often when you move people over, you know? You can also just call them a retard, end the call, and go eat pizza. That's true. What's 1513? 1350. It refers to the a disproportionate amount of violent crime committed by black people in the United States. There's an easy sociological justification for it, but often racists will just throw it out of context as a way of sort of implying that black people are naturally more violent. How would you describe the moral framework of the average modern conservative? Incoherent. But that's the case for like almost everyone. Very, 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 very few people have a consistent, coherent a set of political virtues or values or whatever. The like most people, if you ask like, what are your axiomatic values? Like they're not gonna like they don't they'll they'll hit you with a rock for asking. Do you think you do have a consistent ethical system? I'd like to think so. I don't think anyone has a perfectly consistent ethical system because ethics is so incredibly fucking complicated. Like nobody's solved ethics, you know. I don't think anyone has a perfectly coherent or consistent system, but I think you can have like increasingly consistent and coherent ones, you know? It's kind of like how it's not really possible to draw a perfectly straight line, but you can sure as hell tell the difference between a good attempt and a bad attempt, you know? But if you want to go down to like the molecular level, you know, like, oh, well, see 3 atoms off to the left here, you know, or like a circle. Yeah, yeah, you know, there's, you know, people can, there are, you, yeah, you know, how does someone develop a strong and consistent ethical system? You think about it a lot, I'm afraid. John Mathers, the $5. Hatred, violence, racism, bigotry, and misogyny based on religion and religious differences is evil. There's an absolute value for you. Well, even that I don't think is objective. I want to point out, by the way, guys, I don't like religion in large part because I think it introduces meta-ethical justifications for beliefs. But keep in mind that technically, if you're talking about meta-ethical discluding normative ethics, an axiom is also meta-ethical. So when I talk about religion and the problems with it, please keep in mind that a bad ethical system can do the exact same things. Remember how I've said that like if a religious person believes that God says X, then there's no way to like logically argue them out of that? That's the case for a different axiom too. In a way, a belief in like divine command theory itself basically just substitutes in an axiom for whatever beliefs you assign to the deity that you believe like determines morality. So just keep that in mind, okay? It's not specific to religion. It's a broad thing. I ended up developing my moral framework to establish purpose to pull myself out of the depths of nihilism, which I discovered Nietzsche at my younger age. Yeah, the kind of fucked up thing, like Nietzsche actually did say a lot of really cool stuff. It's just so much of it is corrupted by the fact that there are like edgy internet dude boys, who have never read a fucking word of him, so they just like think, oh yeah, based Nazi mustache man. But he did some cool stuff, you know. You lost me, Vaush, so you say axiomatic value is personal religion. Honestly, if you wanted to frame it in that way, you know, is an axiomatic belief a kind of sort of specific uh like spiritual conviction? In a way that's kind of true. I don't think that's a perfect way of describing it, but I think it's sort of functionally close enough.